Hi everyone, and welcome to the next in our series, Backstage Pass. My name is Eugene and I'm the General Manager at the Midland Cultural Centre, as many of you would know. This series aims to give viewers and audience members at the MCC some insight into the work that goes on, as we say, backstage. A lot of it's actually in theatrical terms called front of house. And our next guest is Lex Danford, who is one of our house managers, and she's going to give us some information, talk to us about her life backstage and at front of house, often invisible to the general public. Well, thanks for taking the time out to do this, Lex. So let's get one thing out of the way. Your name, of course, is Alexis. You're a house manager at the MCC, but you get called a number of names. So let's tie that one down for the purposes of today's interview. Are we going to call you what?
Lex.
Lex. That's the one that I would typically use. So
Lex is my work name.
Right on. Well, thanks for putting your head on the block for this one. We really appreciate it. In a previous conversation, we had Glenn, who gave us some background information into the role of the AV team in the run-up to a concert or a similar event. So today we're having a look at the role of the house manager. So let's start by asking you, Lex, if we can, on the day of a concert, how do you start out your work shift?
Well, it depends because our shows typically start at 7:30 or 8. And depending on the complexity of the show, I either have to come in a little bit earlier, closer to 4:30, or sometimes around 6 p.m. And the first thing I do is I go read the itinerary and make sure I know whether or not I need to give them their dinner buyout, because typically they would need it right away. So there's a hustle to get up there and read through what needs to be done.
You mean the artists, of course, right?
Yes.
And what's a dinner buyout for those viewers who aren't in theater world, as it were?
A dinner buyout is when we give each individual member of the band or group, and sometimes the people that they're traveling with, like tour managers or sound people, anywhere between $20 to $30 each, so that they can go grab something to eat, so that we're not burdened with having to provide all the particular different dietary restrictions that some people have. So they can go out and just get their own food and explore the town. And it's really exciting getting to point them in the direction of our local restaurants, and it's fun.
Yeah, and I remember when Martin Simpson was here, he was dying to get out and explore the forests, and he's a major nature lover. So a lot of times they ask for local information, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
So it sounds like a lot of your work at least starts with the dressing room. It sounds like that's part of your domain, huh?
Yeah, so then the next thing you do is you show them to the dressing room. Okay. And sometimes our AV team will have done that already in sound check, because sound checks can start a lot earlier. But I think you guys have talked about before that golden 10 minutes when the artist first arrives. Mm-hmm. They have to receive our undivided attention and care and listening to what they need, or if they have any questions or expectations, and then making sure we get them to feel safe and comfortable in their own area of the building, so that they know how to get to and from it without having to go out of their way.
Yeah, good for you. And I think our team does an amazing job of that. And you, of course, are one of the major players in that. The feedback we get is extraordinary a lot of the time, all the time virtually, where people, as you say, just feel so comfortable and so at home, I suppose, as at home as you can be in a strange town for the evening, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of it too is having things, a lot of these artists are touring for quite some time. Yeah. So if we can provide any comforts and have things in the room ready for them when they arrive, that just makes them feel more comfortable, like toiletries or hygienic products, or if they have a specific rider with like food or teas that they like. So I always make sure that everything's up there, and if they have alcoholic beverages, that it's on ice, and presented beautifully, and it's really fun, and most people are very, very appreciative, and they all comment that we go above and beyond, and I take pride.
For the viewers, when we talked to Glenn, he explained a technical writer. So just to follow up and connect the dots. So what you're talking about in this case is what's called a hospitality writer. And again, it's a document of some sort that lists out all of their needs and wants, as it were, right? So maybe somebody is lactose intolerant would be a good example. So they want
okay. Or like myself, celiac, gluten-free. We get a few of those.
Yeah.
And yeah, so on their hospitality writer, or they'll just have really specific requests. There are some artists that have to have a specific brand of water with a certain type of honey for their vocal cords. And it's not them being picky or anything. It's just that's what they need to perform at their best level for our guests, our patrons. And we do everything we can to go find it and have it ready for them. And I even got a rider from you one time.
Yeah, from my band. Yeah.
That's right.
The only blue M&Ms. That's the one for us here.
Certainly, there's been a couple artists that had some detailed, specific, organic brands and stuff, and I totally get that, and I have no problem accommodating it.
It's funny, having lived that life a lot in my younger days, I can tell you that one of the pitfalls with the system, from a musician's point of view, is a lot of times there's a manager or somebody that pulls all of that together, and often what happens is they'll say, okay, what do you like, and they make a list, and then 3 months later you're going, oh, I'm so sick of whatever it went on the list, because it never gets revised, right?
Right. And I was looking at that. I saw a writer that had Guinness as the beer, and I thought, wow, if you're drinking Guinness every single day.
Exactly, and it might have been once when someone felt like that. I remember one time being on the tour and asking in the hotel, we were there for a few days, for Danish pastry in the morning instead of like a big cooked breakfast. And they were so obliging. The next day I had it, but then the next day I was offered it again. Well, I didn't have that notion anymore, And so I can see the pitfalls in it, but good for you guys. You do your best to make it happen,
And we've recently got some volunteers involved in that process too, which has really helped.
Right on.
Because we can prepare for this about a week or so in advance so that everything's fresh always. And then the day of, a volunteer might go out and grab like the fresh fruit platter or the veggies. And that's very, very helpful. So
yeah, right on. And of course, the whole objective, again, is that what we're trying to do is make them feel at home and give them the headspace, as it were, to concentrate on what their job is, which is getting on stage and giving us a great performance at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So I should say to both you and our viewers that because we're using Zoom, we have time challenges. So if at any point we're cut off, we'll, we can come back to this conversation again. No rush at present, but just to preempt that, it has happened in the past.
Okay. This is my first Zoom meeting.
Is it? Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
I bet you missed all the backstage people getting you ready and making sure you were here on time.
Yes, I had to do it all myself.
Yeah.
But luckily, I've been trained very well in that. So.
So what other sort of things would go? We're kind of talking about the dressing room a lot, but I suppose you talked earlier about making them feel comfortable in their space or their area of the building, and that was a very good point, because a lot of people don't realize that often, particularly with big names, they actually, in their riders, will demand exclusive use of certain rooms and certain areas in the building, even down to like a private phone line, internet service, and often enough some kind of office space for their tour manager. And I certainly, I know a number of the tour managers, particularly with the bands from Ireland and Scotland, and I can tell you that while the band are getting ready and doing their thing, those guys are very often talking to somebody in Japan or Germany. I mean, they're there to work as well, right?
Yeah, they're making the most of their time.
Yeah.
because there is a little bit of a buffer between, you know, the sound check and then they've eaten dinner and when the show starts. There's this little bit of a waiting period that I myself go and attend to the volunteers and the bar staff. But yeah, the tour managers, that would be an excellent time for them to get work done. And more often than not, sometimes they'll ask me for a private space.
Exactly.
Or they'll go sit in the atrium, kind of the cafe area. But then once the people start coming in, they need somewhere to be alone and get their business done.
It's a tough job, the tour manager's job, especially if it's a band where you're trying to add one recently, won't name names, who said that it was like trying to herd cats the morning after. So between hotel rooms and a tour bus, people have all wanted to be alone on their own, but he's got to get them to the airport the next morning at a certain time. So he's, you know, he's very much like laying down the law. Okay, 9 a.m. curbside at the hotel, and you know his whole mindset from when they arrive at the MCC really is forward looking. They're worrying about the gig. He's worrying about the next gig and the one after that, and the airports and so on. You know.
Yep, and I've become cognizant of this. I used to be very like in the moment, and now I do realize that there is indeed a grander picture for the traveling artist, and we need to accommodate them to help as much as we can. So if that means giving them the stronger Wi-Fi password, you have to do that sometimes.
Yeah, and other issues that people wouldn't realize, probably like ironing boards and steamers and all sorts of add-ons that you'd never think, right?
Yeah, and like towels and like I was saying, toiletries, like sometimes just basic hygiene things, like they'll ask for wet wipes or Q-tips or because it's their stop, and we have a shower that we do provide for our artists, and many of them use it. And then it also become a laundry service because we have to do the towels and stuff. So
yeah, again, they're living in a van or a bus for, you know, sometimes weeks on end, so it's totally understandable, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on then, if we look at the time before the concert or event, so we've talked a bit about the hospitality, as we call it, part of it, and the dressing room and offices and stuff. So what would typically be next for a major concert for you as in the role of house manager?
As a house manager, the next thing for me is to really ensure that the safety is all taken care of and covered. I'm CPR trained, I'm first aid trained, and basically the biggest part of my job is to make sure that in the event of an emergency, all of our bases are covered in terms of emergency exits. So I have a meeting with our volunteers that will be ushering, ticket taking, merchandise, all the volunteers that are a part of the show. And we have a little team meeting, and we review all of the safety procedures, and then we place everybody specifically, and we say, okay, you're responsible for this part of the room, you're responsible for this part, and in the event of an emergency, I'd like everyone to exit this way. And we just we're always refreshing and we're growing. So our current best practices are reviewed every show, every time, because you never know.
That's very insightful. I'm sure a lot of audience members would feel good that, you know, before they get there, there's groundwork to be done every time. That's really good.
Yeah, there definitely is, because, you know, things do happen and we learn from it, and nothing major has ever happened. I've never worked when we've had to evacuate or anything, but I'm very confident that in the event we had to, I would be able to handle that situation. More often we have little medical emergencies, like somebody will feel faint and we'll have to get them out of the room. Sometimes during a television recording, like for a day in the life, we can't stop the show and the camera, so we have to quietly address it to the best of our ability without alerting the whole room. And we've very successfully done that a few times. And so
I think knowing what to do and being prepared is one thing, but then the execution of it, and I think again, in most cases, these incidents, and you're right, there are actually quite a few minor things that can happen. From as little as somebody arriving late and
Yes.
wanting to make their way up through the middle of a TV recording, and you
Yeah.
know that's got to be controlled.
Yeah.
And I think that our team do a great job of making those incidents as discreet as possible. You know,
Yes.
maybe the couple of people either side of the person that fainted are aware of it, of course, but the general audience doesn't see it, right?
Yeah.
And so all of that really comes down to training and this meeting that you have in advance where you refresh what needs to happen.
But it's also, it's done in a really fun way. Like we don't, it's not like every time you show up, it's this like, okay, safety time, let's go. It's more of a discussion sort of, and we review like what the best practices are, and then we just have fun and we get excited about the show, and we tell each other as much as we can about the artist that's coming, so that you can build that momentum with the patrons that are in line waiting out in the hallway. Because the doors aren't open as soon as people come in. Like that's a whole decision in itself. And we'll discuss all the details about the show and as much as we can, and just build that excitement. And it's really, really fun. I love that energy before a show with our volunteers and even the patrons out in the hallway, because often I'll go out and I smile and I greet everybody, and everyone's just so excited, and it's the best feeling.
Yeah, I always think that there's a lot of aspects to a show, especially if you're a ticket purchaser, and that is like, it should be a total experience. It's, you know, first and foremost, of course, is who's on stage and what they're doing, but the whole experience of how you're treated, how you interact with people, what the place looks like. It's all a big part of it. And I think you're absolutely right that the volunteer team and the house managers and bar staff and ticket, everybody together really are part of that show in a way, right?
Yep.
It's like, okay, it's showtime, let's put our best foot forward.
A demanding artist who needs my attention, so I'll delegate a volunteer to help me make sure that those details that we expect for the greater good of the MCC and what we want to show of our community are handled.
So it's fair to say that really, and we're only delving into the first couple of hours of your life, but really the house manager is taking over ownership in a way for the building after the other staff go home for the day, because of course our full-time staff like myself are mostly 9 to 5.
Yep.
And weekdays, but although we've shows a lot of nights in the week, for sure there's a heavy emphasis on weekends. And of course, you know, we all can't be there, you know, 24 hours a day. So in effect, the house manager takes that ownership, right, becomes the key holder, the sort of primo person for health and safety and all of the other aspects of making the evening a success. And there's a kind of term that we use in the business where, like, from load in until after sound check and the band leave the stage to go for dinner or a shower or whatever they choose to do, essentially it's their room. That's the term we would use, right? So you're watching them, making sure everything's progressing, because ultimately there comes a time when you want to start the show in time, but all along you're kind of watching their progress. And really what you're doing, I suppose, is making sure that they're undisturbed, right? That the room is theirs to do what they need to do in preparation for the show.
That's right, because at the end of the day, it's their art, their performance, so it needs to be to their standard that they want to present. So sometimes that means sound check there'll be a last minute change or something will happen, and I'll notice them. I'll be doing my meeting with the volunteers and they'll come back in and be doing another sound check. So we have to leave the room to give them their space, but it also means that we can't just continue on as normal, because we have to monitor and make sure that they're ready, and nothing opens until they say we're ready.
Yeah, so it sounds like as it gets closer to showtime, there's a lot more communication on the radios and clear comms, and you really, like you say, okay, we got an hour, we're now down to a half hour. It starts to get tighter as you get closer to the show time. And then at some point the doors open and the audience is allowed to come in and take their seat. So who makes that call? I know it's advertised. If it's an 8 o'clock concert, often the doors open at 7:30, but that's not necessarily a guarantee, right? So who makes that call?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's me, but it is also, it's the house managers, because another big piece to being a house manager is being aware of the bar, and are they stocked up and like set up and ready to, because the line comes in and you got to serve as fast as you can. But if my bartender isn't ready, the bartender isn't ready, we have to hold off slightly, but that rarely happens. But it's certainly something to think of that affects the overall experience for the customer.
So then moving on then, so getting closer. So let's say for the sake of this example, that's an hour and 15 minutes before showtime, right? So moving on then, the band have gone to eat dinner, have showers, whatever. The tour manager's doing his thing on his computer. You've got lots of jobs to do. But I think at this point now, doing our absolute best to open on time becomes a priority. So now you're starting to monitor when you can safely open the doors. And then beyond that, the next stage is doing our best to make sure that everyone is ready for that exact time, 8 o'clock in this case, right?
Yeah, and another part to it, especially in our community and our facility, like a large part of our audience demographic are older people. Some people may have walking issues, so I'm really watching the crowd for people who appear, if you're uncomfortable standing, I'm gonna boost you to the front, or if you have a wheelchair, you get priority, like you get to come in. So a lot of it is watching and identifying people who need that extra attention and help, and we give it to them, and we make sure that they have a person with them. So if they have to sometimes I have to change where someone's sitting so that they can be closer to the washroom. And that's something you don't really think of, but if they don't have somebody with them to help, if they're sitting front row and then they say that they have a disease or something where they can't walk so good, they're going to have to sit in a different spot to be more available to them. So that's one thing. Another thing, sometimes we have sponsored shows, and our sponsors will have a meet and greet with the artist before the show. And that is the most tense timing, because you have to get the artist over to them without being seen by the public. And you also have to time it in such a way, and sometimes they get chatty. Of course they do, because they're excited, and all of our sponsors are fantastic and interesting people, and we all speak about the community, and you just get chatting, and it's like, okay, we got to start, the show starts at 8. So you just kind of gently come in and do that, and they usually pick it up, and they're like, okay, yes, thank you.
And of course it's at the busiest time, because you've got all these other things happening. You're trying to get the show started, and now we've got this kind of informal chit chat thing happening, which is great, but
it's funny because I'll have my Comcast on, so in my ear I can hear the lead volunteer saying, Lexus, where are you? What's going on? And like all these questions, and I literally I have to escort the artist, and some of our artists are older too, and it takes them, you can't rush everybody. Like if someone has a bum knee, it's going to take them 10 minutes to walk back to the dressing room. So again, it just kind of falls down to communication, being really clear with Glenn, the AV team lead. He's such a big part of it, and even our stage manager, who whatever volunteers in that role, very helpful, because I can delegate that task to them to escort. But that's a really exciting moment before show. A big part of it will be me standing up on the side of the balcony and watching to see how many spots are open and in what sort of patterns. So like for a general admission show, it's first come, first serve, but we can only seat 50 up on the balcony. So it gets to a point where you have to be like, okay, we have 2 couples spots left. so that because you don't want to send up a group of 5 and they can't sit together. That's not enjoyable for the group. But you can offer it to them and say, hey, listen, we do have seats up on the balcony, but you won't be seated together because it's a general admission, first come, first serve. And people are just so happy that you even give them the option, or like the thoughtfulness of, if you wanted to sit together, we can get you in here. Like, it's making sure that all of our guests are comfortable, happy, excited. It's really, really, really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like you need at least a couple of sets of eyes, because you're watching what the band are up to, you're watching the tour manager, you're watching what the volunteers are doing. You're also watching for clues as to the audience, as you just said, you know. So there is some help available, though, and you touched on it for a moment. That's the role of this sort of stage manager person.
Yeah.
And so just to explain that to our viewers, that's a role where someone wearing a clear comm is actually at the dressing room door in communication with the artists and the house manager and the AV. And that person's job really and truly is to get the band members all backstage on time, and to make sure that every one of them is there. At the last minute, one person may decide to go to the washroom, so therefore they can't go on stage. So the stage managers back there really giving verbal clues to all of the team, saying, okay, I've got 5 people back here. Drummer just went to the washroom, will be another minute. Okay, she's back now, we're ready. So that it's all coordinated for that moment of excitement when they hit the stage, right?
Yeah, it very much becomes like when the artist first arrives, or when I first arrive at the MCC, I'm that contact person for the artist. But there is an introduction that sort of happens. We say, okay, this is the stage manager. He has the Comcast to connect to me if you need me.
Right.
But at this point, I'm kind of handing you over to them. And then the stage manager is the person who goes up to the dressing room, and they're trained on how to knock their way down the hallway and say, okay, are you guys ready? Because you don't want to walk in on a changing artist. Some artists don't care. They're like, it's fine. And you're like, okay, but we have
it sounds like, and I know this, of course, firsthand, that one of the most interesting parts of that job and your job and my job, for that matter, is the fact that we're very privileged. We do get to interact with all of these artists, or lots of them, in a situation where really they're very dependent on us. So we also have to be respectful of the fact that we can see them maybe in times of nervousness, or at a time when they're maybe not quite the character that the audience will see on stage. And of course,
I've definitely had that moment with a few people, or they just have these little rituals that they do before they go on stage, and I can't give an example because it's a very intimate, private moment for them. But it's a perk of my job that I get to be there for those moments.
Yeah, you're right. I think intimate is the best way to put it. I mean, I certainly, from my own life, there are times when band members aren't getting on particularly well, maybe before a show. There's issues that you're going to be, you're going to witness that you just simply can't repeat, and we know of a lot of artists who, I guess they kind of take on a persona before they go on stage.
Yeah.
Right? And they actually have to work at that. Is that a fair comment?
That's very fair. And I think that goes back to their hospitality rider and having their particular, like it is a little ritual of getting into character, and it's just mind blowing. Sometimes they come in like really casual, like track pants, and they've been traveling for 10 hours and they're tired, and then they go in and they do what they do, and they come out and they're just ready to perform. And it's really, really cool. It's
We call that the switch. Most artists have a switch that they, you know, when they're backstage and the house, the stage managers there and the tour manager, if they have one, and they're all, you know, counting heads, making sure they're ready to go on.
Yeah.
There's a switch that you know comes into play just before they hit the spotlight, and that to me is the magic, you know.
Oh, it's awesome.
And I think our job is to do everything possible to help them along that process from arrival in track pants, as you said, to the moment when the switch goes on, you know. So very good. One thing we didn't talk about, and we probably are about to run out of time, is merchandise. That's another aspect of what we do and what you in particular do. So
yep. That's something that when I read the itinerary, when I first come in, it's usually says right on the paper whether or not they have merchandise. Most artists do. And it's funny because I've been seeing the trend, the switch from CDs over to vinyl.
yeah.
A lot of people vinyl now because CDs aren't as popular, but they still sell and they come, and a lot of them have deals, or they set their own prices. That's their decision. Some artists will bring a square thing to tap so they can do debit, but most don't. And if we're handling the sales for them, like we'll delegate a volunteer to run the merch table. It's an all cash typically, so I have to make a float, which is fine. Yeah. And then the volunteers, I tell them what all the prices are and everything, and they're responsible for selling the merchandise and then counting for it at the end of the night, and then giving the artist back. They get that moment where the artist thanks them and is grateful because they get this big handful of cash.
Yeah, viewers should know that artists depend heavily on merchandise sales when they're on tour. In a lot of cases,
yeah.
The merchandise really is the difference between making or losing money. We're very fortunate in Midland. I've had like very major artists come to Midland who weren't sure whether or not they would meet the audience afterwards and sign CDs. And frankly, that's because in larger cities, and particularly down in the US, there are serious security implications. I think ever since the John Lennon thing many years ago now, a lot of artists of note are somewhat cautious about, you know, exposing themselves, if you like, so closely to the general public. COVID aside, that's a whole different.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. I've talked to, you know, because I do the contracts, I've talked to a lot of them and said, look, we're a small town on the beautiful shores of Georgian Bay. We've got the most respectful and appreciative audience. You know, they're so appreciative that you're going to even come visit us, that I guarantee you'll never have an issue and you'll love the experience. And I have to tell you, in 100% of the cases, that's what the feedback has said too.
Is it? Yeah. I don't get to hear the feedback after the show, but I can hear it in that immediate moment. And I've been there where in the beginning, one of the questions I ask in that first 10 minutes when I'm with them, I'm like, oh, do you have merch? Are you coming out after to do signatures and meet and greet? And sometimes they'll be like, we don't know. We'll see how we feel. Like, we're tired. We have to drive really far. And you're like, okay, absolutely. Like, not a problem. And like 9.5 times out of 10, they've just had this incredible concert moment with this audience in this, it's weird. It's a small space, but it's a large space. It's like, it's really cool. So they always come out. They come ripping, roaring out, and
that's great observation. It's so true. A lot of them that, you know, we've convinced them from a security point of view in advance that they'll be fine. But on the night, they're not sure. As you say, they're traveling, they're tired and all. But they leave the stage with such a high and it has to be said, such a feeling of warmth and intimacy, even like for big sold out shows. It's still a very intimate space. And I think all of the factors that we've put together, the house managers, the volunteers, the AV techs, all of the stuff that we're talking about in these interviews, all gel together to make this just very special experience for the artists and the audiences, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember specifically Julie Black and Albert Lee, two different artists. They signed every single whatever they could find. They took every single picture, and I was blown away because you look at their rider coming in and their contract, and it's intimidating. You're like, okay, this is big time artist. Let's not.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes I don't expect to speak with an artist at all. Like Chantal Kreviezik, I didn't think I would even. You just talk to her tour manager.
Mm-hmm.
However, she came in and just so down to earth and humble.
I always say artists are people too.
Yeah, she's
so
born. She's been driving
it's all
around.
about how you treat them, right? Yeah. Albert Lee, funny enough, was one of the big name people that I was thinking of in my earlier spiel there, and that like Albert is so used to being a side man with you know the Eric Claptons of this world, and his tour manager, who I've you know talked to for other reasons as well, just wasn't sure that he would come out. He said he's really not used to that kind of limelight. His limelight is on stage. But we convinced him to come out, and I think he was like in the last 3 people to leave the building. I mean, he signed guitars. He
signed one last poster on his way out the door because somebody, one of the volunteers was like, "Oh, I wanted to, but I was too nervous." I was like, "Oh, I'll do it." So I ran down and I was like, "Can I just get you to sign one more?" And he looked at me and he went, "Sure."
He's a really nice guy. A story that most people wouldn't know about that was it took a bit of convincing to get Albert Lee to come to Midland, of course, like a lot of the big names. But I had talked extensively to his tour manager and manager in advance of it. And I was in the audience. I purchased tickets. I was in the audience about halfway back. And during the intermission, I saw his manager walk up the right-hand side of the hall where the washroom doors are, looking for me. I realized he was looking for me, and I thought there was an issue. So I walked over and I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Albert wants to know when he can come back here." That's the truth. He was in the first half just having such a wonderful time, you know. And of course, he has been back since, and hopefully will again. His concert this year, unfortunately, fell victim to COVID, as have all of the concerts for now. Well, that's wonderful, Lex. So I think we can leave it there for now. We pretty much brought the viewers up through and it's really only a few hours at this stage, from 4 to 5 o'clock up until showtime. And there's certainly some other tasks that happen while the audience are enjoying the show and so on, and of course afterwards. So maybe if you're agreeable, we can do another interview like this in the near future and talk about the second half of your day's work.
Yeah, that would be a pleasure. I would love to. I could talk about it forever because it's just such a great, it's such an amazing place, and I love it. And it's not just a job. Like, if people are like, "Oh, what's your job?" And like, like, it's a livelihood, and it's an engaging, rewarding, musical, and it's not even just concerts. Like, we do weddings and celebrations of life and spelling bees with the kids, and every event is so awesome and fun to be a part of. So I'm very grateful, and I could talk at length about it. So
right on. Well, on behalf of the MCC, I want to thank you and all the house managers, and of course the amazing volunteer team for everything that you all do to keep it as successful as it is. And I'd like to finish by saying that we can always have more help, and the position or the role that we talked about earlier in hospitality, that's the job where essentially you prepare the dressing room, have some interaction with the artists, make sure that everything they need that's possible is there, and so on and so forth. We're always looking for new volunteers in that role. So if any of our viewers are interested in that, if they'd like to email me at mcceugene@outlook.com, we would love to talk to you. and have you join this amazing team?
I started out as a volunteer, so I'm an
Okay.
advocate.
Thanks so much, Lex.
Thank you.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye.
So there you go. That's an insight into the life of a house manager in a performing arts venue, in specifically the Midland Cultural Centre, who I have to say quite proudly we pride ourselves in doing a really, really good job with this aspect of it. You know, at the end of the day, the Midland Cultural Centre tries to cater to so many people, so many tastes and genres, and we are in a small community and a relatively small facility. So it takes a lot of boxes being ticked very well in order to attract the kind of talent that we have been successful in attracting. And honestly, it's because of wonderful people like Lex and Glenn and our whole volunteer base who really, you know, go that extra mile and a half to make everyone as happy as possible, to make sure that everything is in place to produce an amazing concert for the audience, and equally importantly for the artists. I have never had an artist yet that didn't contact me within minutes, hours, or weeks wanting to come back to the Midland Cultural Centre. And I think that is testament to our strengths. So thanks very much for watching this video. Hope to see you all soon. And please watch out for our other virtual content, A Day in the Life, Straight Talk, Our Health, Eugene's Picks, where I give people insight into some of my favorite concerts of the past. And we're looking for new content as we go forward through this pandemic. And of course, as always, we look forward to the day when we can see you all back in our facility. Bye for now.